what's going on. Just hours before, we had a very, sort of, we had two sides fighting each other in Lebanon, in southern part of Lebanon, Israeli forces, IDF, and Hezbollah. The fight was so heavy. Looking at the footages and the pictures coming out of southern Lebanon, basically what Israel was trying to do there in the region close to Al-Taher Hill. Al-Taher Hill is so strategic. It's some sort of castle, if I'm not mistaken. And the importance of the location is, this is they tried it 5 times before, and last night was the sixth. They failed to achieve the objective, Israelis. What is the importance of Al-Taher Hill? Is that this is a large Hezbollah fortress that is located with dozens of underground tunnels and many elevated shooting positions. And it has the upper, you go there and you can see all over the region. Somehow there's some reports that they can have some sort of leverage even toward the northern part of Israel. They can see the northern part of Israel, the importance of this Al-Taher Hill. And just moments ago, we had Iran was in communication. They were communicating with the United States, talking to each other, and they put a lot of pressure. We just 2 hours ago, we learned that they closed the Strait of Hormuz again to put pressure on the United States. And the IDF, after receiving a lot of pressure from the United States, which came from the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian pressure on the United States, they announced that the ceasefire is coming back. In the last 24 hours, I would say more than 10 times they said, we have a ceasefire, we don't have it, we're fighting. And Israel, by the way, just 20 minutes ago said that they were considering, the ceasefire. But the problem is they're going to stay there if Hezbollah attacks them, and they're going to respond. This is the sort of situation they're facing, the two sides in Lebanon. You can say, as long as Israeli forces are in the southern part of Lebanon and these sort of fights are happening, because Israel is there to achieve something. What is that? To destroy Hezbollah's position, to destroy, the southern part of Lebanon, the homes, everything, the houses there, the villages and cities. This is the agenda on the part of Israelis. But when it comes to the situation and the way that the United States is trying to communicate with Israelis, I know that you're aware of what's going on between the Trump administration and the Israeli officials. What is your understanding on that?
Well, it seems that any effective communication or dialogue between the Israeli administration and the U.S. administration is certainly firewalled right now. I guess the best way to say it, between egos, between claims of sovereignty, claims of not agreeing with the memorandum of understanding for the deal that the United States would make with Iran. So I think that communication and diplomatic channels are strained, because really, from Israel, from the U.S. perspective, we don't have an ambassador who is in Israel who is willing to have conversations with the Israeli government on behalf of the United States interest. We have an ambassador in Israel who sides with Israel over the United States. So you really don't have that diplomatic balance of representing American interests. And the truth be told is that this agreement, this memorandum of understanding to forge the path towards an agreement eventually, an actual treaty or armistice or official ending of the war and the terms to it, is in America's interest. When most Americans look at it, they say, well, this is a surrender, this is a loss, and that's true, it is. But at this point, for what the United States could have hoped to ever have achieved, this is in the United States' interest to end this war in the terms that are currently on the table, because the terms will only get worse the longer this goes on. Israel has a vested interest in continuing this conflict, keeping the United States and Iran in a military conflict. It does not meet Israel's interests to have the United States and Iran in a ceasefire or a stalemate. Look at North and South Korea. North and South Korea have been in an armistice, a ceasefire, for over 70 years. They're still technically at war. So when you look at this, a ceasefire, can a ceasefire still exist but a war hasn't ended? Well, of course it can. But that is not in Israel's interests. Israel's interests, based on their own political interests and their own geopolitical interests and their own Zionist interests, is that the war continues directly, kinetically, between the United States and Iran, which in a way allows Israel to continue its military operations in southern Lebanon with little attention or deflection. So the United States doesn't really have an honest broker or a diplomatic representative in Israel to represent U.S. interests. In these negotiations, we're sending, or in the 60-day planning for what the deal will be, we have Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, highly under-prepared and under-skilled to conduct diplomatic negotiations with Iran. And then in terms of, the diplomat we have in Israel doesn't represent U.S. interests at all. So the United States is kind of in a position right now where we were a few days ago, where I said that the United States is at a point where it must make a choice. Israel first or America first? To stick with this deal that the United States has made with Iran in the eyes of the world, or violate it, not follow it, and continue in conflict, whether it's kinetic or cold, with Iran, with the Strait of Hormuz always in question, with sanctions and releasing of assets and all these questions going back and forth in this, which could be a cold conflict or a hot conflict, to choose sides with Israel. So the United States has to make a choice. I think we're now seeing clearly. And I said this a few days ago, and I said it last night with another panel, another interview, that the Iran doesn't have to respond with missiles and bombs. They have something much more powerful and much more effective than a hypersonic missile or a ballistic missile, or even, quite frankly, a nuclear weapon. The leverage to the Strait of Hormuz to shut it down at will. And there's nothing that the United States Navy can do about it without high intensity conflict, which is not in the US interest either. So we're seeing right now with what's happening today with Iran using its leverage. Okay, fine. Israel was continuing its fighting in Lebanon. We are not going to meet you in Switzerland. We're not sending our team to meet you in Switzerland to start talking about this deal when you aren't even meeting the first steps of this deal or this framework. Continue, and there'll be further consequence. Okay, continue. What are in this moment? What were Iran's options? Conduct strikes in northern Israel, conduct strikes at the headquarters or central government buildings in Tel Aviv to send a message. Sure, all of those things are on the table. But what is really going to compel the United States to compel Israel to stop the Strait of Hormuz? So Iran has clearly understood the assignment and understands what has been learned in these previous 108 days of conflict, kinetic conflict, as to where the critical factor is. What's the lever? And they figured it out. And if the United States doesn't make a clear choice soon, there's multiple levers that Iran can manipulate here. There's the Strait of Hormuz. There's kinetic strikes. Maybe not against Gulf nations, because most of the Gulf nations, I think, at this point are like, yeah, we're done with the war here. Let's figure out a way to exist and normalize relations. So specifically, you're going to have Israel as a sore thumb, as a target directly. But then there's also the Strait of Bab al-Mandab with Ansar Allah having leverage. These are things that the real pain that can be inflicted upon the United States, not necessarily through bombs and missiles, but through the economy and economic leverage. That real pain hasn't even been realized yet, and Iran still has the ability to turn the dial. So what we're seeing right now, Iran's response to the continued military incursion and military operations in southern Lebanon, that to me seem to be escalating. Since this agreement or this digital signing last week and this ceremonial signing in Versailles late last week, it doesn't seem like the fighting in Lebanon it doesn't seem like withdrawal or leaving to me. It seems like it's escalated. So, and this was something that I had mentioned before, that just because we see tactical military forces on the ground moving into positions that may look like you're moving back geographically on terrain, doesn't mean that operationally you're intending to withdraw. It could be a consolidation of forces to continue offensive operations. That's how combined arms maneuver and wide area security works. Maneuver. So I think we're going to see continued escalation in the south, which organically, when it comes to Israel, leads to further escalation in the region, which could be strikes in southern Beirut, which then again is another red line. So I think the way I think Iran is approaching this, which is the way I would do it if I was Iran and I was a strategic planner and I was offering them military advice, I would say, south of the Litani River, where Hezbollah is fighting, the levers that we'll use to invoke a response from the United States to put pain on the US for what Israel does will be the Strait of Hormuz or other economic levers. If Israel starts to strike north of, or looks like military operations north of Litani, or once again towards Beirut, which organically it looks like it may go there if they're still targeting specifically Hezbollah leadership, then Iran can always step it up to where kinetic strikes directly against military units in northern Israel or even in Tel Aviv, while also inflicting further economic pain on the United States. That's how I see this going. And right now, the United States is still very clearly not willing to stop Israel from doing what it's doing. Can the US even stop them?
Yeah. Tony, when you talk about Iran putting pressure on the United States using the Strait of Hormuz, do you think that somehow is working on the Trump administration? That's the reason that you see J.D. Vance and Donald Trump coming out and attacking somehow Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration. We had Israeli attack on the Trump administration because of MOU, because they see whatever they see coming out of MOU is a total defeat for Israel, I would say. And this is, at least in the eyes of Israelis, I'm talking, not my opinion. In the eyes of Israelis, what they're putting out, they say this is the total defeat. And none of our objectives has been considered in this MOU, because they wanted Iranian nuclear program to be dismantled. They wanted to put restrictions on Iranian ballistic missile. They wanted Iran to stop supporting the, as they call it, Iranian proxies, in the basically talking about the acts of resistance. And they wanted to diminish Iranian geopolitically and militarily in the region, to be more under the dominance of Israel in the region. So none of those objectives has been achieved in the eyes of Israelis. So when they're attacking the United States, and you talk about the United States, Iran can use the Strait of Hormuz to put pressure on the United States, considering what is going on between the two administrations. Do you think that's going to be possible for Iran to use the Strait of Hormuz to make some sort of leverage on Israel? And what would be the outcome for the Trump administration going after Israeli agenda or Netanyahu's agenda?
Well, neither Netanyahu, Iranian leadership, nor American leadership, or United States of America's leadership, have a crystal ball to look and say, this is exactly what's going to happen. So everything is a matter of speculation, hypothesis, attempts, leverage. When I look at this, I think that the Donald Trump administration, the U.S. administration, is very concerned about the implications that are coming to the U.S. economy based on the preceding days of the Strait of Hormuz being shut down. That backlash, so to speak, like a whip. The crack of the whip doesn't come at the movement of the wrist. The crack of that whip at the long end of that economic chain has not hit the United States yet. And when it does, if the Strait of Hormuz is still under the control of Iran, at least in a military sense, what we're seeing now with a blockade, so to speak, or an actual restriction of who can use it, the perception of the American people is that, well, that's a direct correlation to loss or failure against Iran. Get into a deal, get the Strait of Hormuz open, as the implications of rising costs start to hit the United States. And right now, I think most Americans, look, price of oil went down. It's a little bit cheaper at the gas pump today. I just filled up on gas on my way home from the airport. It's a little bit cheaper. Okay, Donald Trump ended the war. Prices are cheaper at the pump. That's temporary, and that's fabricated. That's manufactured. The true implication of the total width of the economic implications from the Strait of Hormuz in terms of agriculture, refinement, fuel, etc., we have not felt it yet, and we're going to feel it. So Iran understands that. Donald Trump understands that. Israel understands that, but Israel does not care about America. Israel does not care about the Americans at home or the average American, nor do they care about America. So for Israel, doesn't matter. For the US, it obviously does matter. And for Iran, it's a very clear leverage. Is it the only thing? Is that if Iran looks at this and says, oh, look, the Strait of Hormuz, on, off, on, off. We want America to do something, turn it on. We want America to do that, turn it off. No, but it is a lever in the choice of options, the full range of strategic options of which Iran can respond or continue on in these negotiations. And like I've always thought, in looking at the 14 points of the Memorandum of Understanding, point 2 through point 14, those 13, those are all negotiable. There's space, there's trade space on the table. This much gets released, these sanctions at this time. What's the toll on the Strait of Hormuz going to be? How do we craft that narrative so it doesn't look like we just gave it up, but it's more of an administrative, like all of those things are, there's room on the table to negotiate with those. But point number 1, there's no gray space. There's no wiggle room. There's no maybe some of this or maybe some of that. It's very clear. Stop this before any of this ever becomes a reality. And if you don't stop it, then we're not proceeding with these things. And Iran has shown that you don't go ugly early, right? You don't go all in right off your first step. So Iran is looking at it, okay, we're not going to Switzerland. We're out. Now, Strait of Hormuz, we're gonna control that again. What does the United States control? The United States can then respond and say, we're not going to lift sanctions, and you're not going to get your frozen assets back. And if you're Iran, you look at that and you say, we've been fine without it for decades, so doesn't really impact us immediately. Checks in the mail, fine. Strait of Hormuz is real and current. So the US isn't really dealing with any leverage that can influence the immediate situation. Iran can. Back to the question of Israel, and that should the question be, can the United States stop Israel? Well, Israel is a sovereign nation. Israel doesn't have to listen to the United States. I think it's clearly showing that they aren't a good ally. But then now the United States is going to have to make a decision in how that's going to be conveyed to Iran. Iran, United States here. Sorry about our asshole ally. We're cutting ties. We do not want to be linked to them in this deal anymore. And therefore, anything that you want to do, Iran, to respond to what they're doing, have at it. Have at it. We're not going to respond. We're not going to provide them with the assets. We're not going to provide them with the defenses. They are on their own. Let's negotiate this. Then there's the option where the Trump administration can look at it and say, we're choosing our old bedfellow and we're going with Iran, with Israel, and we're going to back them in however Iran may respond, because more response is coming. Or the United States can say, Israel is the problem. We will have to take some type of action against Israel to compel them to stop if we ever want to see this memorandum of understanding see the light of day and become a real thing. Now, does that mean sending in the 82nd Airborne into southern Lebanon to push the IDF out? No. But could there be sanctions? Could there be other levers? Because there's a lot that we give Israel that isn't always seen in terms of direct, normal diplomatic channels. Are there levers? There are. So when I look at that, I think of it in terms of what can the United States do? And what can the United States not do? What can Iran do? And what can Iran not do? Iran cannot compel the United States to release sanctions or release frozen assets. But Iran can inflict political and economic pressure with the Strait of Hormuz. The United States cannot directly dictate what Israel does as a sovereign nation. But the United States can clearly signal its support or lack of support, or which side it is going to, through voices like J.D. Vance, the president himself, or actual actions. I think it'd be a great step to show some initial backbone, some spine, to say, hey, all of those strategic fuelers, gone. We're leaving. You can't use them anymore. Is that going to halt Israel dead in their tracks? No, but it sends a powerful message. So right now, the way I see this is that the United States is still very much trying to play the, hey, there's still a ceasefire, right? Hey, we're still negotiating. These are all little hiccups. It'll buff out. And I think the United States is missing the forest through the trees here, and realizes that this is only going to escalate to a point to where we might be at full-scale conflict again, depending on how the United States chooses to stand its ground. And to side with Israel would be putting America last. As much as it sounds counterintuitive, this deal as it stands right now is in America's interest to close and to finalize and to move on with the normalization of relations in the region without trying to be a hegemon or a military occupying power. And if Israel is the thing that's preventing us from doing that, well, then we need to make that clear and do something about it. I don't think this administration has the spine to do it, but we'll see.